In a forgotten corner of Cedar Hollow, a young mechanic named Harper Lane discovered an abandoned police motorcycle hidden away in a dusty barn. The abandoned police motorcycle was rusted, its saddlebags stiff with age, but inside, she found something far more valuable than metal and leather. It was a letter from a fallen officer to his daughter. Never delivered. What happened next? Harper's decision to restore the abandoned police motorcycle and track down the woman it was meant for would set off a chain of events filled with tears, memories, and the power of promises kept. This moving story of how an abandoned police motorcycle brought a father and daughter back together will stay with you long after it ends. Before we dive in, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's episode is truly mind-blowing. Let's get started. It was the kind of find most people would have walked right past a rusting police motorcycle, leaning on its kickstand in the corner of a forgotten barn, its once proud chrome dulled to a lifeless gray. But for Harper Lane, a 27-year-old mechanic with a love for lost causes, it was impossible to ignore. Harper had grown up in the quiet outskirts of Cedar Hollow, a small mountain town where everyone knew everyone else's business and where time seemed to move a little slower. Her garage sat at the edge of town, a converted grain shed that smelled faintly of oil, rain-soaked wood, and coffee. It was a place where neighbors dropped by to talk more than to fix anything. That afternoon, she'd been hunting for old bike parts at an estate sale when she spotted it. The police insignia was barely visible under a blanket of dust. The leather seat cracked and sun-bleached, the saddlebags stiff with age. She ran her hand along the tank, feeling the grit under her fingers. And for a moment, it was like touching history itself. She had no idea yet, but inside those saddlebags was a secret that would stop her in her tracks and change everything she thought she knew about this town. Harper stood there longer than she meant to, her boots planted in the dust of that dim barn, staring at the bike as though it might tell her its own story if she waited long enough. The air smelled of old hay and motor oil, the kind of scent that settled deep into wood and metal after decades of silence. The man running the estate sale, a wiry fellow in his 60s named Martin, wandered over. That old thing belonged to a police officer back in the 80s. Been sitting here since, I'd say 92. No one's had the heart to touch it. He looked at it like you might look at a gravestone, something sacred but untouchable. Harper crouched down, brushing her fingers along the saddlebag clasps. They were locked, the metal corroded but still stubborn. "Do you mind if she began?" But Martin shook his head. "Bought the place. You bought what's inside. It's yours now." She swallowed. The price was more than she'd planned to spend that day. But something about the motorcycle felt different. It wasn't just a machine. It was waiting. Harper counted out the bills, ignoring the quiet voice in her head that said she was being foolish. Back at her garage, she wheeled the bike into the light. The dull chrome caught the sun in a way that made her imagine what it had looked like roaring down Main Street decades ago. Sirens blaring, tires gripping the asphalt in a storm of urgency. She set to work cleaning it, starting with the tank. Layers of grime came away in gray streaks, revealing the faint outline of the Cedar Hollow police emblem. Her hands moved with the steady patience of someone who knew restoration wasn't about speed. It was about respect. Hours passed. The bike seemed to wake up under her touch. The tires were dry and cracked. The chain rusted, but the frame was solid. She kept circling back to the saddlebags. They weren't big, but something about the way they sagged told her they weren't empty. Finally, with a deep breath, she took her drill to the lock. The bit whined, the metal gave way, and the clasp popped open with a reluctant snap. She hesitated. Inside was an old leather jacket, folded with care. The black was faded to charcoal, the seams frayed, but the badge stitched into the front pocket still caught the Light Sergeant Daniel Cross. Beneath the jacket lay a small wooden box, its hinges tarnished green with age. Harper lifted it gently, her hands suddenly unsteady. She set it on the workbench and opened the lid. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Some were Polaroids, others glossy prints yellowed at the edges. They showed a younger man in a police uniform, leaning on this very motorcycle, grinning like the world was simpler then. In several, he stood beside a woman holding a little girl, her hair in pigtails, her smile wide and unguarded. There was also a folded piece of paper, brittle with time. Harper unfolded it carefully. It was a letter, handwritten in ink that had bled slightly over the years. If you're reading this, it means I didn't make it home. Please tell my daughter, Emily, that her dad loved her more than anything in this world. I never wanted to leave, but I had to serve. If you found my bike, keep it running. Let her ride it one day. Daniel. Harper read it twice before she realized her cheeks were wet. The words felt like they had been waiting for anyone to carry them forward. She sat there in the quiet of her garage, the sunlight now fading, the jacket and the letter between her hands. She had only come looking for parts, but what she'd found was a story interrupted, one that had never been given its ending. Harper knew then that fixing this motorcycle wasn't just a project, it was a promise. The next morning, Harper didn't waste a second. She brewed her coffee extra strong, set her phone to silent, and rolled the motorcycle into the center of the garage like she was about to perform surgery. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, casting long beams across the dusty floor and turning the bike's rust into something almost golden. She laid out her tools in perfect order: wrenches, sockets, a wire brush, a stack of clean rags. This wasn't just about getting the engine to turn over. Every part she touched felt like turning a page in someone else's unfinished book. The first hours were spent stripping away the years. She scrubbed the chrome until it gleamed in thin lines. She removed the cracked tires, the brittle brake cables, the chain so rusted it clinked like a pile of coins when it hit the floor. Her hands worked methodically, but her mind kept circling back to the letter. Emily. Who was she now? Did she even know this bike still existed? By noon, Harper had the engine open. The smell of old oil hit her sharp, metallic, a scent that could send any mechanic back in time. As she worked, she kept glancing at the leather jacket and box on the workbench. They seemed to watch her, as if Sergeant Daniel Cross himself was standing in the room, waiting to see if she'd honor his words. Halfway through cleaning the carburetor, Harper's phone buzzed against the counter. She almost ignored it, but the screen lit up with a number she didn't recognize. On instinct, she answered. Harper Lane. The voice was a gravelly baritone, the kind that sounded like it had been through a lot of winters. This is Harper. My name's Tom Keller. Martin from the estate sale gave me your number. He said you bought Dan Cross's bike. Her grip on the phone tightened. Yeah, I'm working on it now. A pause. You should know. Dan was my partner. We were on duty the night he... The man's voice caught. A rough inhale. That motorcycle. It's the last thing he touched. Harper swallowed hard. I found something in the saddlebags. Photos. A letter. Silence. Except for the faint hum of the garage fridge. Then, you read it. Yes. Then you know about Emily. I do. I want to find her. Tom's voice softened, but carried weight. I haven't seen her in over 20 years. After Dan died, she and her mother left town. But if you're going to do this, fix that bike, I think you should." They spoke for nearly an hour. Tom sharing stories of Dan that Harper could almost see a stubborn grin under a police cap. The way he'd never let a kid walk home alone in the rain. The quiet patience he had with people most officers overlooked. Every story sharpened the picture in Harper's mind, not just of the man, but of the life he'd left behind. By the time she hung up, the afternoon light was softer. Harper tightened the last bolt on the rebuilt carburetor and stepped back. The bike still had a long way to go, but something in it had changed. It didn't look quite as abandoned anymore. Then it happened. As she wiped her hands on a rag, she noticed the second saddlebag, the one she hadn't opened. The clasp was jammed tight, the leather warped. She grabbed a flathead screwdriver and eased it in. The metal gave with a sudden pop. Inside was a small, weathered envelope, sealed and addressed simply to Emily on your 18th birthday. Harper froze. The air felt different, heavier. She turned the envelope over in her hands, the paper soft from years of waiting. She didn't open it. Some things weren't hers to read. Instead, she set it gently beside the leather jacket and whispered into the quiet, "I'll find her. Dan, I promise." Harper had always thought of her work as solitary, her tools, her machines, her quiet garage. She liked the control of it, the certainty that if something was broken, she could fix it. But that week, as she worked on the police motorcycle, she realized she wasn't fixing her project. She was carrying someone else's unfinished story. The frame came first. She sanded away the rust, layer after stubborn layer, until the metal beneath showed its silver bones. Then came the paint, deep, dignified black, just as it would have been when Sergeant Daniel Cross rolled out of the station decades ago. As she sprayed, she imagined Emily seeing it again for the first time. Would she recognize it? Or had time blurred those childhood images into something unrecognizable? The days passed in a rhythm, mornings spent in the garage, afternoons tracking leads. Harper called old precinct numbers, police retiree associations, even high school alumni groups. Some calls led nowhere. Others ended in awkward silences when she mentioned Dan Cross's name. Then, on the fourth day, she reached a retired dispatcher named Marlene. "Oh, honey," Marlene said, her voice warm but weighted. "I remember Emily, little thing with a laugh that filled the whole room. After Dan died, her mama took her to Ridgeview, 2 towns over. I think she stayed there until she was grown. Ridgeview, a place Harper had driven through 100 times without thinking. That night, Harper sat at her kitchen table, the leather jacket draped over the chair across from her, the sealed envelope resting between them. She didn't open it. She wouldn't, but she couldn't stop thinking about the weight of it, the years it had been waiting for the right hands. The next morning, she loaded the bike's polished wheels into her truck and drove to the only mechanic in town with a tire press big enough for vintage rims. While she waited, she caught herself telling the shop owner about Dan, about the saddlebags, about Emily. The words came easily, as though the story had been waiting for her to carry it forward. When she got home, she set the new tires beside the bike and just looked at it. The motorcycle was starting to resemble itself again, the way it must have been when Dan rode it down Main Street with the sun glinting off the chrome. She ran her hand along the tank, over the fresh paint, and it hit her this wasn't just restoration, this was resurrection. She wasn't simply rebuilding a machine, she was reviving the pride, the service, and the love that had been poured into it. That realization changed something in her. Before, Her goal had been to finish the job and find Emily. Now, it was about how she would do it. She wanted Emily to see her father's bike exactly as it had been, down to the smallest detail, the polished badge, the stitched leather grips, even the way the mirrors caught the morning light. She took extra care with the badge. It had dulled over the years. The edges scratched and the lettering faded. Harper polished it slowly, gently, until the silver shone and the words Cedar Hollow Police stood proud again. As the week drew to a close, the bike stood on its own two wheels for the first time in decades. Harper stepped back, wiping sweat from her brow, and felt an ache in her chest, a mix of pride and anticipation. She thought about calling Tom Keller, telling him about Ridgeview, about how close she was. But something told her to wait. She wanted to be sure to have the bike ready, the envelope in hand, before she reached out. For the first time since finding it, Harper realized this wasn't her project anymore. It was a bridge between two people who had been separated by years and loss, and she was just the one lucky enough to build it. She didn't know it yet, but the bridge she was building was about to carry more than she could have imagined. 2 days later, Harper stood in front of a modest brick house on the edge of Ridgeview, her palms slick against the handlebars of her truck's steering wheel. The motorcycle sat in the bed, strapped down and covered with a canvas tarp. Even under wraps, it seemed to carry a gravity that pulled at her. She'd found the address through a neighbor of Marlene's, who swore Emily still lived here. It had taken Harper nearly a week to work up the nerve to come. The morning was quiet, a light breeze carrying the smell of freshly cut grass, a dog barking somewhere in the distance. Harper sat for a long moment before climbing out of the truck. She walked up the short path to the front porch, the envelope in her jacket pocket feeling heavier with every step. When the door opened, the woman standing there looked to be in her early 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a loose knot and eyes the same shade of green as Dan's in the photographs. "Yes," she asked, polite but guarded. "Emily Cross." A flicker of suspicion passed over her face. "Who's asking?" "My name's Harper Lane." She began, her voice softer than she expected. I think I have something that belonged to your father." Emily's brows knit together. "My father." Harper gestured toward the truck. "His motorcycle. A 1980s Cedar Hollow police bike. I found it in an old barn. And I found this." She pulled the envelope from her jacket and held it out. Emily stared at it for a long beat before stepping forward to take it. Her fingers trembled slightly as she turned it over, reading the faded handwriting. "He wrote this. For me," she whispered. Harper nodded. "On your 18th birthday. I didn't open it. I thought that should be yours." Emily didn't invite her in. Instead, she stood there, eyes locked on the envelope, as if afraid it might vanish if she blinked. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Harper said gently. "But the bike, I restored it. It's ready, if you'd like to see it." Emily hesitated, then followed her down the path. Harper climbed into the truck bed, unfastened the tarp, and peeled it back. The black paint gleamed under the sunlight. The chrome mirrors caught the morning rays and flared bright. The badge, polished to a mirror finish, read Cedar Hollow Police as clearly as the day it left the station. Emily's hand flew to her mouth. She stepped forward slowly, almost afraid to touch it. When her fingers finally brushed the leather seat, her breath caught. This was his. I remember sitting right here, holding on to him. Harper stayed quiet, letting the moment stretch. Emily walked around the bike, tracing the curve of the tank, the smooth line of the fender. Her eyes were glassy, her jaw tight. "Why would you do this?" Emily asked at last, her voice barely above a whisper. Because I found his letter. Because I think he wanted you to have it. And because—" Harper paused, glancing at the bike. Some things shouldn't be forgotten. For the first time, Emily looked directly at her. The suspicion was gone, replaced by something Harper couldn't quite name gratitude, maybe, or disbelief. She didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, she rested her palm flat on the tank and said, "He would have wanted me to ride it. But I don't know if I can—" "You don't have to today," Harper said. "When you're ready." Emily nodded slowly, then turned back toward the house. "Would you like to come in? I think there's coffee." It wasn't much, but Harper felt it the opening of a door, not just to the house, but to something larger. She'd brought the bike here thinking her part was nearly done. But now, standing on that porch with Emily, she realized this wasn't the end of the story. It was the first step toward something new. She didn't know it yet, but the motorcycle had more to give, and it would take both of them to see it through. Harper hadn't expected to be back in Ridgeview so soon. But 2 days after that first meeting, she was pulling up to Emily's house again, this time with the motorcycle strapped in the bed of her truck for good. Emily had called the night before, her voice quieter but more certain. "If you're free," she'd said, "maybe you could show me how it works. I don't think I'm ready to ride it yet. But I want to understand it. I want to understand him." Now Harper was unloading the bike onto the driveway, the morning air crisp and smelling faintly of pine. Emily stood nearby in jeans and an old sweatshirt, her hair pulled back, a mug of coffee in her hands. "It's heavier than I remembered," she said as Harper lowered the kickstand. "Yeah," Harper replied, patting the seat. "Built for the long haul and for taking a beating." She crouched beside the bike, showing Emily the polished badge. "First, this. Every officer in Cedar Hollow had one, but they all wore differently over time. This one, it's still strong." Emily knelt beside her, brushing her fingers over the metal. "He wore this badge every day." Her voice was soft, almost reverent. Harper nodded and began walking her through the controls, the ignition switch, the throttle, the brake levers. Emily listened intently, her green eyes fixed on Harper's hands. She asked questions. Small ones at first. "What's that lever? Why does it click like that?" But soon the questions grew bigger. What was it like for him, she asked, riding into town, hearing the radio calls. Harper glanced at her. "Tom Keller told me he was steady, not the kind to speed unless he had to. Said he liked being out there, watching over people." Emily's gaze dropped to the handlebars. "I remember the way his jacket smelled, leather and soap. I used to fall asleep on his back sometimes when he rode me home from the park." It was the first time she'd spoken about her father without the shield in her voice. Harper didn't interrupt. She just handed her the rag and polish. "Here, your turn." Emily hesitated, then began working the rag over the chrome. The repetitive motion seemed to loosen something in her. She told Harper about the day the officers came to the door, about how her mother wouldn't open it at first, about how, for years, she avoided anything to do with the police because the uniform meant loss. "I guess I thought if I forgot about the bike, I could forget about him," she admitted, her voice breaking for the first time. "But I never really did." Harper set her wrench down. "That's why I think you should ride it. Not today, not tomorrow, but someday. Because when you do, you're not just riding a motorcycle, you're carrying him forward." Emily's eyes glistened, but she didn't look away. She nodded slowly, as if agreeing with something she'd been fighting for years. By the afternoon, they had the bike cleaned to a shine that made it look ready for parade duty. Harper helped Emily climb onto the seat, steadying the handlebars as she settled in. "It's bigger than I remember," Emily said, gripping the throttle gently. "You've grown," Harper said with a faint smile. The bike stayed the same. Emily sat there for a long moment, her hands resting exactly where her father's would have been. She closed her eyes, and Harper could almost see the memory playing behind them, a little girl. The rumble of the engine, the safety of her father's presence. When Emily finally climbed down, she exhaled deeply, like she'd set something heavy down. "Thank you," she said simply, "for bringing him back to me." Harper didn't correct her, because it wasn't the bike she meant. It was nearly a month before Emily called again. Harper had left Ridgeview that day with the quiet sense that her work was done, or at least that the rest was up to Emily. But when the phone rang and she heard Emily's voice, she knew something had shifted. "I'm ready," Emily said simply. "Will you come?" So Harper drove, the early morning sun breaking over the hills as the black and chrome motorcycle gleamed in her truck bed. When she pulled into Emily's driveway, she saw her standing there in a borrowed leather jacket, a helmet under her arm, her expression somewhere between fear and resolve. "You sure?" Harper asked as she rolled the bike down the ramp. Emily nodded. "He wanted me to ride it. I think it's time." They started on the quiet road behind Emily's neighborhood, a strip of asphalt that wound past open fields and a few scattered oaks. Harper gave her a quick refresher clutch, throttle, brakes, balance. Emily listened, her hands steady even though her voice had trembled when she spoke. When the engine roared to life, Emily flinched, then smiled. The sound wasn't just mechanical, it was familiar, like a voice she hadn't heard in decades. She eased the bike forward, feet dragging lightly at first, then lifting as she found her balance. Harper jogged alongside for a few yards before stepping back, watching the black and silver machine carry Emily down the lane. The wind caught her hair, her posture straightened. The road stretched ahead, sunlight flashing on the mirrors just as Harper had imagined it. And then something happened, a low rumble in the distance. A convoy of motorcycles appeared from the curve ahead, their riders wearing patches from the Cedar Hollow Fire and Police Riders Association. They slowed as they passed, each giving a nod, a salute, or a two-finger wave toward Emily. She lifted her hand from the throttle just long enough to wave back. The gesture small but certain. Harper saw the way her shoulders eased, the way her whole frame seemed to let go of something. When she returned to the driveway, Emily killed the engine and sat there for a moment, helmet still on, hands gripping the bars. Finally, she swung a leg over and pulled the helmet free. "I thought it would feel like losing him again," she said, breathing hard but smiling. But it didn't. It felt like he was right there with me. Harper didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The look in Emily's eyes said it all: relief, connection, pride. The riders from the convoy had turned around and now idled at the curb. One of them, a tall man with silver hair, stepped forward. "That was Dan Cross's bike, wasn't it?" he asked. Emily nodded. The man's gaze softened. "I rode with him for 15 years. He was the best of us." He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small metal badge, a commemorative token from the department's 100th anniversary. "This belongs with you." Emily took it with both hands, her lips pressing together to keep from shaking. Later, as Harper loaded the bike back into the truck, Emily lingered beside her. "You didn't just restore a motorcycle," she said. "You gave me a piece of my father I didn't know I could have back." Harper tightened the last strap and looked at her. "He gave it to you. I just helped deliver it." As Harper drove away, she caught sight of Emily in the mirror, still standing in the driveway with the badge in her hand, sunlight spilling over her. The wind had picked up, carrying the faint scent of leather and gasoline, the scent of a story finally finding its ending. Or maybe, Harper thought. It's beginning. Some stories aren't written in ink. They're carried in the metal, leather, and dust of the things left behind. When Harper found that abandoned police motorcycle, she thought she was restoring a machine. In truth, she was restoring a bridge between a father and a daughter separated by time and loss. The Saddlebags didn't just hold a jacket and a letter. They held a promise and promises, no matter how old, deserve to be kept. Because for Harper and for those who follow the road is never really the end. It's just the place where the next ride begins. The end? Up next. 2 more powerful stories waiting for you. Click to keep riding with us, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe some promises are worth keeping.